Good afternoon, John. Donovan
I
in San Diego. It's Marty Keller up here in Sacramento. Another Friday afternoon. Hey, there's a couple things have been on my mind I'd like to see maybe we can talk about a little bit. I've been watching a couple of podcasts about the situation that we find ourselves in our culture today. And um, I've been watching Benjamin Boyce for a long time. Ben did the original videos on the Evergreen College situation up in Olympia, Washington. And then Brett Weinstein, who was the professor who was at the ground zero of everything that was going on there at Evergreen, also started a podcast with his wife, who was a professor with him there. And Ben had a couple of guys on today who were Protestant theologians. And one of them actually is from here in the Sacramento area, although I'd never heard of them before. And they had this wonderful conversation about their conclusion after an hour and a half was that we're coming back to Christianity as a solution to the what looks like craziness or chaos or insanity, depending on where you stand. And by that, they didn't mean organized theological Christianity, although they held out the belief that there are institutions in place that can offer that, but more about the transcendent possibility that the Jesus represents in Christianity, that Jesus is the symbolic fusion of the divine and the human, that after Jesus goes through death and resurrection, the traditional Christian view is that that brought salvation to us sinners. But another way to look at that is that it erased all the barriers to all of us understanding that we have the exact same nature and we have the exact same possibility to create our lives by our deepest desires, and that there's something in the universe that absolutely 100% supports that when we say we want it.
yeah,
And that
and
if we don't ask for it, we don't get it.
right. And the part that they're missing is the trauma avoidant trauma dysfunction that has been assimilated by our subconscious, which is subjective, and then it has taken that trauma information, that dysfunctional way of being in the world, that avoidant behavior that a child has to do because he hasn't got the capacity to process his emotional angst, frustration, and it gets stuck. And it gets stuck with a directive. If this happens again, do this: freeze, or scream and yell and stomp your feet on and run up to your room and slam the door, or hit and punch things, or compromise, or just get frustrated to the point where you cope with whatever's happening in your childhood.
But you're
That direct,
coping, if I may, you're coping by cutting yourself off from the actual source of love.
yes,
So we create this bastardized sense of what love is through that activity.
yes. So we separate ourselves or isolate ourselves from the sources of our pain or frustration, and then we do this dance, this dysfunctional dance, where maybe in the morning we don't talk about what happened last night, or after it's all over, you're going to be a good boy now, and you know, yeah, and have this seething resentment internal that doesn't have any words to it. And then you grow up, and that situation is similar. You get in a loving relationship, and you got wounded in what was supposed to be a loving relationship. So you equated loving relationship with this information, and any little thing that happens here, we call it trigger. And I'll talk about personally, I find myself stomping my feet, running up to the room, slamming the door, and I don't understand why. And I don't understand
I
why.
was a door slammer too.
Yeah. So this material in living intentionally, accountability process, exercise love equals talking about where you find yourself, the end result of this trauma. The end result of the trauma is what we classify as avoidant behavior. If you look at the DSM-5, it's categorized and labeled as mental illness or separation from self or antisocial behavior, when in truth, it's the trauma that has been assigned and charged with keeping us safe, and it's simply looking out for our best interest. And then we say, think positive. So we have this think positive, do affirmations, and we have this cluster of trauma, and we put this icing of affirmations and positive thinking over it. And after a while, we find ourselves going back to the old behavior. We're frustrated because look, everybody else is doing it. How come I can't do it? What's wrong with me? And we judge our insides by other people's outsides, which most of the time I want to offer other people's outsides is a performance everybody's putting on so that they look good. And
yeah. Well, my experience, I just want to ratify what you just said. My experience in the Unity Church, the New Thought Church, which is got an allegiance to the power of affirmative mental process, which, you know, there's a basis of truth in that, but it was a missing piece, as you said, for me. So what happened was, not only would I affirm stuff, but not get the results that everybody said I should, then my reticular activating system would take that failure and just put it back onto the self-violence of love equals I'm unlovable and I'm all alone. So it just proved to me that I was unlovable because I couldn't master this stuff. Right. And since nobody talked about their failure to master this, because it was all smiles and we're all busy affirming truth and denying the unreality and all that kind of stuff, there was no opening for someone to go, this isn't working for me. What do I do?
We've actually created in the New Thought process another extended dysfunctional family.
Well, if our collective subconscious, without getting too esoteric here, because we'll keep it focused on the individual, but if our collective subconscious is riddled with this separation anxiety, then how could we?
Right. Yeah.
It takes that wacky individual who has somehow, through some grace process, which I believe is accessible to everyone, but many are called and few choose. It takes some wacky individuals to wake up to this inner potential, whether it's a Buddha or a Jesus the Christ or Zoroaster or the Egyptian Hermetics that we've talked about before. And for them to have this experience, because it's not a thought. There's something happens where an experience manifests and the individual gets that he or she is no longer just an individual. That he or she is, as Eric Butterworth says, he's an eachness of the allness. We're all eachness of the allness.
Right.
And to then almost reverse engineer, so how did I come to that realization? And then seek to offer that to anybody who's interested in the same experience.
So my experience in drug and alcohol treatment inside the institutions and the daunting task of working with, well, my own recovery first of all, and then offering this information about accountability, which my experience was, it was relief. It didn't change the behavior I had done. It didn't change the pain that I caused myself and the people around me. What it did was give me a demarcation point to consciously choose something else. And in the admittance of doing harm, I'm an alcoholic, or mine, another example is arrogant, entitled, mean, controlling, or another example would be, I'm a bad father. In the awareness, in the statement of that truth, that behavior, the results from my total experience as a human being, including the subconscious trauma, is in understanding that me resulting in a mean father is simply in alignment with the information. So when I told the truth, mean father, the emotional frequency came up, gave me insight into, oh my God, yeah, I did this and this. And then I created the intent. It is my intent to be a loving, caring, nurturing father. And it fused with that frequency, that awareness. And then again, went back down into the subconscious with a new directive. I didn't try to do something different. I didn't try to be a loving, caring, nurturing father. I found myself attentive to my children, watching them, looking at them, wondering, maybe even having the urge to go back to old behavior. And I want to offer the old behavior didn't stop at that moment, and it started mitigating. And I was what I call lucid, being able to observe the impulses that were coming from inside to do this, do it now, make sure, be rigid, don't let them say that because they're going to grow up and be criminals. All the stuff that was going on in my head that was an excuse for my rigidity and what I used to call it stern, but it was actually coercive and violent. I became aware of them in the moment, and then each moment became an opportunity to take a breath, realize this is simply the end result of my child of origin trauma. Take a breath and make another decision. Even if that decision was do nothing, just breathe, and then wait. And then options came to me. Just like the options to be intimidating or judging or critical came to me in the moment, these new options are coming from that pool of information that has now been infused with loving, caring, nurturing father.
Is this an example of what we say in the Adult Children of Alcoholics ACA 12-step work of reparenting? Isn't this
Yes.
what you're talking? Isn't that what
Yeah.
reparenting is like,
Yeah.
or it
Yeah.
consists of? Because you were basically parenting your kids the way you were parented.
Yes. Oh, and the way I treated myself.
Right. Right. So it's all a projection of that accidental experience. Accidental, I mean you couldn't have planned it ahead of time.
Right.
So you were born into it, and there it was. And now we're seeking to reparent, i.e., to create a parenting relationship of genuine nurturing, appreciation, valuing, which is what we wanted anyway, but got perverted because what was provided wasn't that. But we had to accept it as it was, and that's why,
Right.
as you said, it's something that became, my word, coagulated in my nervous system and protected me from any further harm until I was aware that that's what I was still doing years after I was no longer in that environment.
Yes. When ACA talks a lot about reparenting, and it's one of the opening statements they have when I first went to my first meeting is the solution is to reparent ourselves. And then I didn't get a whole lot of information on the how.
Right.
What I've discovered is that if I'm in a moment of irritated, agitated, otherwise annoyed, and I simply observe or don't criticize and allow myself to feel that without blame or judgment, and absolutely stopping the behavior that stems from that is critical, which is an element of what happened to me. When I see my 4-year-old grandson frustrated, screaming, yelling, telling me he wants me to go home, he wants me to leave, I simply mirror for that child. I see you're frustrated. I see that you're frustrated. and it's okay. It's okay. You can be frustrated. Or I see that you're angry, and it's okay to be angry. You're disappointed, and I'm not going anywhere. And don't blame him. Don't try to change it for him. Don't tell him he's wrong. Just allow him to experience that frustration. And I'm still there loving him. I'm not telling him to go up his room. He's not being separated from me. He's he has choice, and that's what I didn't get as a child, and that's what I give to myself as an adult for myself. I notice what I'm doing, take a breath, own it, take it to the accountability tree. I'm being mean right now. I'm mean. Take a breath. No criticism, no blame. It is my intent to be kind. And every time I do that, it's a command, it's a directive to this subconscious pool of information to shift the behavior in alignment with kindness instead of watch out for yourself. People are going to take things personal. I used to take what my children did personal. I was like, you can't talk to me like that. And I've never said that to my grandson, because you know what? He can talk to me like that out of his frustration. It's my response that he's watching, that his imprint is, I can be mad at grandpa and grandpa still loves me. Grandpa doesn't belittle or humiliate me. Of course, he hasn't got these words,
Sure.
but that's what's happening. That's what's happening in that little child being person of his. And the moments that we share together that are connected, I just can't tell you how enriching and fulfilling that is. And I know that he's 4.5. He's developing the ability to identify his own self, separate from his mother, separate from his grandfather, and what he wants. And so we're nurturing and lovingly moving through that with him instead of criticizing him, blaming him. I've never said to this little child that he's selfish, because you know what, 4.5-year-olds are selfish as hell, because that's all they know, and that's their developmental stage. They get to be absolutely 100% selfish, and I'm going to mirror for him what can and can't happen in a loving way. Anyway.
Well, I'd like to offer then, run this by you as I was listening to you. What showed up to me is that commitment on your part to maintain your own integrity in relationship with your grandson is a version, or it's an element of reparenting for you.
Mm-hmm.
Because what jumped into my mind is when I go through the accountability practice and I come to what do I want, and I state an intention, the willingness to consult with what I want, which in my process, I just go into my body and let my body tell me
Yes.
what it wants. Yeah. And then I set my intention. That is also healthy reparenting. The setting of intentions is a process of reparenting in a loving way, because when you're mirroring for Solomon this relationship, he has a right to be who he is. He has a right to be selfish and be upset, and you have a right to maintain. You're not going to participate in upset, right, or whatever, the way he is, and you're just going to let him be who he is. That's this whole process of accountability in reparenting is about paying attention to what's true for us in the moment, beyond our little psychic smokescreen that we've taught ourselves to give out. So I just
I want to offer. I liked when you said integrity, and I want to offer a connection to Scripture or sacred Scripture, mm-hmm, and how it's been misinterpreted. When I worked in the jails, a lot of these men would talk about raising their children, and they would use the phrase, spare the rod, spoil the child. Well, that used to like stump me. It's like, spare the rod, spoil the child. Okay. What do we do with that? And then it dawned on me one time where I heard somebody talk about the rod in ancient times was a unit of measurement. So, okay, so if I spare my measure, what am I measuring? And my conclusion was it was my own integrity. If I spare the measurement of my integrity, I spoil that child. That made perfect sense to me. And that's what this material does, is bring everything back to me. No blame, no judgment. This is the behavior I've come to based on my experience. It's in alignment. This hurts. Feel the hurt. What do I want? I want relief. So loving, caring, nurturing father, grandfather, father is in alignment with that experience, that finally feeling the pain of being dismissed as a child. That hurts. And then it is my intent to be a loving, caring, nurturing father, grandfather. And it just simply melds into the pool of information. And I find myself doing things differently. In this culture, we go to the condition and then we want to change and fix the condition. We want to stop doing that, and we want to start doing this, and we want to meditate, and we want to have this. And my meditation practice, for what it is, which I believe is a good one, and my practices are simply the result of this inner work. I don't have to work at a practice. I don't have to start a practice and then, oh my God, I got to do this for the rest of my life. I simply find myself laying in bed before I go to sleep, thinking about what is it I want? What did I do today? How do I want to be? It is going over my intent. It is my intent to walk in beauty, peace, and compassion with an open heart and open mind, because I've been told that those moments before sleep and when you awake are lucid moments, moments where you're open to suggestion, and I give myself my suggestions based on my experience, based on my ability to feel the pain of the behaviors that were in alignment, came out of my family of origin trauma.
Let's talk about that a little bit. As you were sharing that, I kept thinking of, I think it's Jung's observation that there's no coming to consciousness without pain. And
Yeah.
And you know, our human condition is that we don't want pain. I mean, that's a natural reaction to pain, is to try to get out of it. And yet one of the four constants that we started talking about last week is, you know, move toward your pain. So how do we deal with this human flinching against pain, which is what caused our love equals traumatized defense mechanism to be formed the way it was in the first place, and at the same time recognizing that avoiding pain is not going to solve our problems?
You know, there's so many different ways I can go with this. One of the things I want to say in creating the four constants, and one of them is move towards your pain. The pain I'm talking about is the original pain.
Correct.
The trauma pain, not the pain that I created through all the avoidant behaviors that I engaged in for 25 years that created the chaos and separation and isolation that was in my life. The pain that motivated those behaviors was addictive behavior, violent communication style behavior, arrogant, addressing the motivation for the outcome and not going to the outcome and then saying, I gotta quit being mean, I gotta quit being arrogant. When this pool of information directive has been that the way that I stay safe is by developing arrogance. That keeps people away from me. And if people are away from me, I'm not going to be hurt like I was as a child. And all of this is in my subconscious. None of it is in my awareness.
Right.
So I understand that if I say the truth of where I find myself, bad dad, arrogant, entitled, and just breathe without any blame or judgment, the resolution or the place I want to go comes, it's an inspiration. It comes out of me. It doesn't come from my rational thinking. It comes from some place. And that place has a knowingness of what's important right now. What's the feeling that I'm addressing? What is it I want? And then I have direction from knowing where I'm at. I'm right here, arrogant as hell. what do I want? Is my intent to be kind, or is my intent to be compassionate, or is my intent to build the foundation for compassion? Knowing where I'm at, and that's what most of this material is all about. Who am I? Where am I? And where am I can be classified or described as arrogant. That's where I'm at. And wherever I'm at is in alignment with my past experience. If you go to a mall, every merchant in that mall believes it's important that you know where you're at. Every pillar you see, there's a map, and there's nothing on the map except you are here. They think it's important that you know where you're at so you can find them. What I've discovered is when I understand where I'm at, which is arrogant, I have direction. I could look for something else. If I'm justifying the arrogance, or if I'm saying it's them, or blaming it, or I wouldn't be that way if somebody else hadn't done da 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 da, I'm real clear where I'm standing right now. Next to this pillar, I'm arrogant. What do I want? I have direction. That's when choice happens. We believe we're making choices, and we're knee-jerking from old experience that has directed us to do these certain things to stay safe, like leave people or create a barrier or isolation. And it's simply looking out for our best interest. When I own, I am here, arrogant. I want to be kind. Is my intent to be kind? Or is my intent to be compassionate? Or is my intent to love myself? And that intent, again, becomes a directive. And I don't have to do anything. I simply pay attention, because I'm going to start acting. My experience is I was different. I experienced myself differently. I call it being blindsided by healthy behavior. I find myself in a situation where I was being considerate, or I was paying attention, or I actually answered somebody's question, and I go, how did I do that? That was odd. That's cool. And I didn't try to do all that. It simply was the manifestation of my experience, which was now infused with choice based on the truth of where I found myself.
You know, the process is so wondrous, if you will. It's wondrous relative to my belief system before I encountered this. So now it's not so. Now it's more lawful than just wondrous. But I was thinking as you were sharing that of the universal experience a lot of people share in meetings, which is behavior on the road. And I can remember for most of my adult life that when someone would cut me off, or somebody would do something that was disruptive of my driving, they were idiots, assholes. I would sit in my car and go, "Where's my gun?" Because I wanted to shoot their tires out.
Yeah.
Like, I have been so offended and defiled by these people's behavior. So as I got into this work, and I I'd done a lot of this, the practices that we share here, and it's my intent to create a life of joy, peace, freedom, and community. Now I find when somebody cuts me off, I just go, "Oh, I need to tap the brake."
Yeah.
It's like,
Safety.
where did all that go? Where did the renegade with his gun go? It's like, it's like you said, how did that happen? I didn't sit around and say, I got to go on the road and practice this.
No.
There's something, we fail words. We've tried this before. Like alchemical is one of my favorite words. There's an alchemy at work here, where we're spinning lead into gold. And I'm the same person that was driving the car before, and it could even be the same person cutting me off. I don't know. But something radically shifted without a whole lot of heavy lifting.
And here's the good news, which is counterintuitive. That guy that wanted to pick up the gun's still there.
True.
So if you need that guy, because you may need that guy, he still knows how to handle stuff. And and your first impulse was your own safety, and I would consider their safety too, because that's my experience on the freeway. If somebody is rushing and I see him cutting through traffic behind me, I simply make sure he gets a way to maneuver around me instead of going, watch this, and I'll pull in front of him. And I don't
I
do
still
that
do that
anymore.
sometimes.
I want to offer I still can. I can if I, whatever the situation is. And this was the thing in the jail with the guys. It's like, choose nonviolence. And they were hearing me say, don't be violent at any situation. And that's not what I'm saying. Just know that it's a choice. If there's something happening to you where violence is the thing that's going to keep you safe, and that's your only choice, then I'm not saying don't make the choice. Just know that when you make the choice, it's violent, even in self-protection. Now, then I'd tell them, it is my intent to act non-violently in any violent or potentially violent situation. That's my intent. And they said, well, what are you going to do? I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. I'll tell you what I do after it happens. Because I don't know. I don't know what may happen. I do still have the choice to be violent. And now I have more than just that choice or look like a wimp. I have the 10,000 options in between that weren't available to me before I created the intent to act nonviolently in any potentially violent or violent situation. It gives me options in the moment.
But I would submit there's more to it than that. I think that it also gives us the emotional resonance to be satisfied with that new choice. It's not just intellectual.
Very good point.
There's a feeling state. So when that guy cuts me off and I just kind of go, oh, that guy cut me off, there's a peace. I said I wanted peace. So my body is just relaxed. And now that's being reinforced rather than anger or fear or whatever was coming to the fore before.
So if we could boil down recovery or spiritual seeking, in recovery, they simply say moving from reactor to actor, giving yourself a moment in between your knee-jerk reaction. That's one of the benefits is you move from reactor to being an actor, taking your time, contemplating, offering yourself a moment, information, and that desire to know that I have the capacity to deal with situations, to know that I have an influence over what happens to me, and to know that my participation in this, whatever community I decide to be in, is needed and vital and needed by my community. If I have those three things in place, I am less likely to choose violence or to put myself in an unsafe situation.
But the point I'm trying to make here is that there's now an emotional feedback loop that reinforces this new intent. Just like there was an emotional feedback loop that kept me separate back when that was my defense mechanism.
Yeah.
All the resources of my brain and my body, as you said, now these are my words, will marshal themselves to keep my defenses intact whenever it felt threatened.
Yeah.
And even years later, in relationships that are now just reminding me of family of origin situations, I'm still behaving as if I'm a 1-year-old kid in mortal peril. Now, as we've created these new intents, my body similarly rallies all its resources to reinforce peace or joy or freedom or community, which are the options I've now chosen to experience. So my point is that there's a lawfulness to the way our emotional body supports us based on what we're choosing, either subconsciously or consciously.
I agree, and the example I gave, moving from actor to reactor, has all that in it. It has, when I would find myself being coercive or violent, dismissive, ignoring, or redefining somebody that I said I loved, that action was to keep me safe. And what I was looking for is to be seen and heard. and it was running off this old information. Me being proactive doesn't mean I get exactly what I want. Me being proactive in any situation, I've come to discover is what I want. Self-validation, that I at least voice or talk about or move to some kind of resolution. The other person is they can do whatever they want. When I find myself in this situation where I'm being proactive, usually the other person wants to come with me. And it changes. I tell people I'm working with, in any relationship, it only takes one person to change the relationship. Because if I stop playing the game, whatever the game was, dysfunctional family of origin trauma, the game we created, when somebody quits playing that game, the other person's playing all by themselves, and they look kind of foolish just jumping up and down when there's everybody else is calm around them, or you are calm around them, or I am calm around them. So it changes the dynamics of the relationship. In the accountability tree, it's truth, no blame, no judgment, take a breath, I intend. And then the next step is self-validation. That's the result of me owning my behavior without blame or judgment, knowing that it's in alignment with my experience, my trauma, and then choosing something different. That self-validation is what I'm looking for from other people, only I'm learning to give it to myself. And when I can give it to myself, other people, I've found that other people shower me with validation. Like a wait for the miracle. And to me, that was the miracle. When I stopped controlling people, they started doing things like, how come they're doing it different now? I didn't even say anything, but it's all my perception being filtered through that trauma, which it no longer is being filtered through that trauma because I've addressed it piece by piece by piece, incrementally, through the process of owning whatever behavior I find myself in the moment, which I can count on, not on my hands and toes, but like 5,672 times I've been accountable, which has shifted my whole experience base. And it's actually, the more you're talking about, maybe, is connected me to a higher source of information, this collective field we're talking about, this, I don't know what to call it, inspiration, where poets get all their words from, this place that we're connected to this source, and it just is rich and abundant.
Reminds me of that famous quote from Mozart when he was asked how does he compose. He says, "I sit down at the piano and it just starts coming."
Yeah.
And I'm just a channel of something. He said, "So that I don't compose the stuff." But I think that
I find myself, Marty, in my life, in my relationships, in what you might call the mundane, with this capacity.
right.
And I'll say something in a group, and I'll say, somebody write that down. That was really cool. Write it down. I want to remember what I just said, because it's coming from that place. It's coming from that freedom, that spontaneity, that connection to myself, which is connection to source.
I have the same experience when someone says, "Could you say that again?" I go, "No."
No. Actually, even I hope you heard it really cool, because
It's come and gone,
I'd like to hear what I just said.
Right. I wasn't reading from a script. But the going back to this video that I talked about at the top of this conversation, there is something, because it's been around since the dawn of human consciousness. There is something of the experience of, again, you were reaching for some words there, transcendence. People have used the word divine, God, whatever. There is something universal within the human experience that I believe, because it's universal, every culture has expressed it, experienced it, that it's something that we can rely on. And it is something that we can test. And that's actually part of what accountability, why accountability has practical value, because it's something we can test and we can adjust based on the results that we get or we don't get. And in addition, the power of doing it in the group is the group can help me with that adjustment so that I don't adjust back in the direction of the traumatized belief system, but I help to adjust in the direction of my intention.
Yeah, and you know, we all feel this truth. We all know what's really going on underneath the words, and yet we've been trained not to say, to dismiss, ignore, and redefine our own reality. And this process of coming to know myself, of accepting where I find myself, just saying the truth about that, taking a breath, and then saying what I want that's different than that, has allowed me to trust myself, trust that inner voice. We all have this inner voice that, you know, we'll begin to do something we know we're going to regret, and hear this voice say, and maybe not so easy tone and really sometimes loudly, quit, what are you doing, don't do that. And I found myself going ahead with the with whatever I was doing anyway. I couldn't stop. Now I listen to that voice. I take a breath and go, oh, okay, let me think about this. Let me be with this for a minute. And I find myself in this, well, peace beyond all understanding, like Christ talked about. I'm not claiming the total understanding of that. I am claiming what I'm experiencing right now. And I'll tell you, I'll take this over anything that was offered to me before my recovery. This is,
Well, you can't claim understanding because it's beyond understanding.
right.
So one of the questions that these guys were talking about on this podcast is, I think it's related to what we're doing here, and that's the practice of forgiveness. In a certain way, what's implied in the accountability practice is a forgiveness. If by forgiving we mean giving up resentment and requirement of ourselves or another person, and instead we're pivoting toward what the present moment is offering us as a possibility. What do I want? Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, I think we're asked to go to forgiveness sometimes too soon. There's the grief process itself has 3 or 4 steps before acceptance, or acceptance of whatever happened, of the loss. And forgiveness, I believe, in my experience, has been the same way, where if I allow myself the experience to remember, to feel the old trauma, I'm angry, I'm incredulous. It's like, how dare they? And that's part of what I believe for me was a foundation to be graced with forgiveness. Grace, when I came to any forgiveness, it wasn't because I'm going to forgive this person because I'm such a good guy. It was in this process of expressing my ire or awareness of my own behavior, and it was like this forgiveness just washed right through me, and it was an acceptance and a recalibration of my priorities. And it had really, actually, it had a lot to do with the other person, because they were then had to deal with whatever they had to deal with. I wasn't trying to take it away from them by being resentful or bitter. They were left with what they had created so that they could choose to work through it or not. It's like when I forgave my dad, I got that it wasn't acquiescence to what he had done. It wasn't condonance of what he had done. It was my removing myself from the effect and the impact of what he had done. He was left with everything. It was his job to do it. It's not my job to do it. And that's kind of an awkward way to describe forgiveness, because my experience of forgiveness is much more than I can articulate right now.
The reason I raise it is because I'm always interested in the historical resonances and precedents for what we're doing. Mm-hmm. So one of the things that these ministers were talking about is that in the Protestant churches, the whole notion of a sacrament of confession has been given up. And I was thinking about, my experience as a young Catholic kid. Confession is when it's done effectively, is basically what we're doing in accountability. Is I'm owning my truth, and I'm owning a truth that I'm ashamed of. So that's why I didn't want to own it before, or I'm afraid of, because it may bring me to that pain and I don't want to experience that. And then the second part of the work is that God says, okay, wipe clean, done. What do you want? And so it seems to me that the human struggle has known a lot of these things for a long, long time, and that there's still, and my theory is it's just we're young, we're in the adolescence of humanity. So there's just a long way to go before we get to mature adulthood as a species. And like adolescents, like teenagers, we're going to go through a lot of pain and trauma and fear and tribalism and all those things that characterized our teenage years before we emerge. And we're better for it. We're better for it because of the struggle. The struggle actually has value. It's part of our formative process. And we look forward to this state of grace that's always present, but when I'm in struggle, I'm not aware of that.
Yeah.
But when I'm in the group, again, the group represents for me the state of grace, present, physically present, not as a theory, but as an actual experience. And when I do the accountability work in the group, then again, the alchemy, it just rushes in, so that when I'm in alignment with my own truth, I watch heads nod and eyes tear up, and I get that I've tapped into something universal. It's not really my own. I thought it was my own until I tapped into it. And it's just my humanity, not something uniquely mine, even though it's my unique lens that's looking at it.
Yeah. I tell people I'm offering you this information to so that you can participate well in the struggle. I'm not offering this information so that the struggle stops, because the struggle is part of life, and me participating in the struggle in a healthy, loving, nurturing way is my intent.
Well, as our time comes to the end here, I love getting a little theological, because I think there's value in it, because we came through these cultural norms that include these theologies, and underneath the specifics, there's a lot of universal truths that are expressed through these unique religious artifacts and practices. But underneath it all, there's this work that you've tapped into in a much more practical way than any religious practice I've been involved in.
All spiritual texts and every sacred writing was written so that we could live well, so that we could participate in the struggle and grow and mature. And reincorporating the spiritual aspect of who we are as human beings, I think its time has come. Based on the last couple hundred years, I don't know the timeline, where we've been secular or scientific or human beings, rational, mechanical beings, has run its course. And we're coming back to everything I say to you is based in some spirituality, in spirituality. Everything I do is based in spirituality, based in consciousness, however you want to couch it. And reincorporating that. I use a lot of quotes from the Bible or Bible verses to reinforce what I'm telling people, like this: spare the rod, spoil the child. If that's the true meaning, or my meaning that I get now, spare the rod, spare my measurement of my own integrity, or I will spoil my child. That makes perfect sense to me. And before, when I was in my 20s and 30s, the rod as a stick made perfect sense to me too. And I've grown into this new idea of what it is through self-examination and looking at where I found myself. Where am I? I'm this miserable, isolated, alone individual, and what do I want? I want help. I want some direction.
Not only miserable, isolated, alone, but scary.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Frightening. I was a frightening individual. People looked at me and said, "You're scary." No, I was afraid. I was terrorized, and it presents as mean and dangerous. Yeah.
For me, the religious history of this just lets me know that the process that we're engaged in, I'm engaged in here, is the conscious integration of the emotional body, the rational body, and the intuitive body. That these things are all one within me, but I didn't understand that. I didn't know that.
Right.
In our scientific rational alone, merely scientific rational analysis, if it can't be measured, it doesn't count. So they took out the emotion, they took out the intuition, and then we were just left with the mental. And you know, we need the mental, but it's not the only thing.
Right.
So for me, again, what you've taught me is about befriending the subconscious so that all the elements that are living there become my allies rather than my enemies.
Yeah, they're simply offering me information about how to get to where I want. And it's all inside. It's all inside.
Exactly. Well, any final words of wisdom before we wrap it up?
Let me recite a poem that I wrote back early in my recovery. It's a short one. And it goes like this. I have traveled eons to reach the end of the universe, and then again that distance times 10, and emerged in a new mother's tear of joy and embraced you. And I will again and again.
Thanks, John.
You're welcome.
John Donovan in San Diego, Marty Keller here in Sacramento. Thanks everybody for joining us, and we'll see you next week.
Okay. Thank you, Marty.